Hello, people of God in our Wassa parishes, and welcome to this special Holy Week edition of Quick Things, an important conversation about the most important part of our week, and that is our celebration of Triduum, the great 3 days that begin on Thursday night. And I'm happy to bring into a conversation about Triduum two friends who I often talk with after Triduum. We've never talked before Triduum.
Right. That's true.
I don't know I hope that doesn't jinx it or something. Um, so with me is Vicky Klima, and I'll ask both Vicky and Mike to tell us a little bit about themselves. But Vicky and Father Mike Jonkis, priest of the senior priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. Vicky, a director emeritus of worship for the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and many other things as well. Vicky, you want to share a little bit more about yourself with folks, who you are?
Well, I was born in Wisconsin, if I can start back then, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, but I moved here in 1979 and began a liturgy journey with a degree at the University of St. Thomas and wound up as the director of worship for about 20 years. So I did these Triduum liturgies at the cathedral, where we really don't skip much. Uh, but then after that, I was in two different parishes in the Twin Cities and helped out with these kind of things. And I retired a few years ago, right before the pandemic, and then had no excuse, but during the pandemic, to write the book I always wanted to write. So, oh, look, he's got a copy of it. That's so nice.
Which my
Um,
parishes still need to get to.
Well, anyway, all of the things that I had done and experienced over many, many years went into writing that book about the Mass. And so I'm happy to be here to talk about my favorite subject with
Yeah.
some of my favorite people. So thanks.
Mike, who are you?
Now, that is a profound question I'm trying to explore with my spiritual director, but we'll let that go. Okay.
Hey,
As you've already mentioned, I'm a priest retired from active ministry, although I don't know what that means. A priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis. I've spent almost all of my priesthood teaching at the University of St. Thomas and various other places. But at the very beginning, my first 2 years, I was also the pastor of a very small parish. And at the end of my teaching career, the last 6 months, I was also pastor of a very small parish. So I do have a little bit of practical pastoral experience in all of this. So
but the fact that you haven't been a pastor for many years does not mean that you don't have a great familiarity with our topic today.
one hopes, one
And
hopes.
and
Well,
Mike, Michael, oh, go ahead, Vicky.
just that he should acknowledge that he's subbed at many, many parishes for all of the liturgies of the Triduum. So he has presided at them numerous times besides when he was parochial
Pastor.
vicar and when he was a pastor.
Well, and that's when we get together. So Mike and Vicky and I and some other friends get together after Easter and have a long conversation in which we talk about the most amusing moment and the most sentimental moment and the most profound moment, etc., of our celebrations of Triduum. And Mike, being at different places almost every year, always brings kind of a different spice to that conversation. Although,
That's right.
well, I get that gets to something right away. So, I was in the same place for 20 years. Um, Obviously, Triduum was never the same from year to year. Would you maybe start talk about that a little, Vicky, about how, yeah, the book is the same and the readings and things all kind of plotted out the same, but why is it not the same?
Because you are not the same. That's why. Because year after year, we have experiences. Hopefully, we grow, but we have good experiences and bad. And we bring all of that with us really as a new version of ourselves, so that something that struck us last year might not strike us at all, and some new thing all of a sudden takes on greater meaning. And the biggest examples are when you really have some kind of a tragic thing that happens, a loss, a death, even things that aren't necessarily bad or good, but like moving to a different place or um, getting married, any of those kind of things. They've changed your life. They've changed who you are. And so you view things with different eyes. And that's why we need to go over and over and over again with these things, because each year they can go deeper into our hearts as we experience them on another kind of level.
Mike, anything to add to that?
No, Vicky has said it perfectly.
To use this three examples.
Yeah.
I have just in observing people washing feet.
Hmm.
So there was a couple in Stevens Point, Casey and Caroline, who washed each other's feet every year at our Holy Thursday celebration. But then Casey was in a tragic accident and was paralyzed. A tree fell on him. So the next year, when they washed each other's feet, it was not the same, was it? And it wasn't the same for anybody else. And that's maybe kind of an extreme example, but there are things like that that I see among the folks. And so they're obviously experiencing that, I mean, more profoundly than I am. And also when people come to venerate the cross, and we all know that we are not coming to the cross as we did a year ago,
Yeah.
And
Right.
when we
Different
go to the
crosses.
font, and when we go to the font at the Easter Vigil, we'll have someone to put in that font this year. Will hopefully affect all of us in some way, or have an impact upon us. So we talk about Triduum, and we do as if everybody knows what we're talking about. Father Mike Jonkas, professional educator, tell us
I will
what
be
we're
happy
talking about.
now to put on my hat as a professional theologian educator. And that's simply to say, Triduum is a technical term that just means 3 days. It's a statement about time and how we really mark time. And this is the thing that's usually very surprising to Roman Catholics, because we talk about a Triduum starting in the evening of Holy Thursday and lasting all the way till Vespers, till evening prayer on Easter Sunday. So it seems even more than 3 days by the way we count time. But Triduum, as you can tell, is just a Latin underlying term that stands for 3 days. I am going to make one fairly important point about it, though. Most of us think of these as a whole series of liturgies that happen over those 3 days. In fact, this is one liturgy, beginning with the evening prayer, evening Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday, and as I say, lasting until the final formal prayer on Easter Sunday.
And there's a point that I always make when I'm doing anything on catechesis on the Triduum, is that at each of these liturgies that we think about as a whole, we aren't reenacting things that have happened before. Um, it's something that happens today. It happens today in our lives. And we bring the past. This is one of those wonderful theological things, but we bring the past and the present and looking into the future. That's all happening together at all of these events. But we aren't reenacting. We don't pretend on Good Friday that, oh, Jesus has died. It's terrible. I'm
I feel
I'm a
really bad
sinner.
about it.
I feel really bad about it. Right. We know we don't forget the end of
Here
the
I am
story.
laughing.
Yeah, we don't have to pretend we don't know the end of the story. We do know the end of the story. In fact, one of the prayers for Good Friday talks about in the sure hope of the resurrection. It's right there in the liturgical books. So that's just really important, because I do think there are people that want to reenact these specific moments at the end of Jesus's life. and that's not what we're doing.
And we like dramatic effects like pounding nails and things like that. That kind of take our breath away, right?
Yes.
The Triduum is well, it's somewhat new, but it's also ancient. So how did this kind of resurface?
That's a Mike question.
Oh, it's my question. Okay.
Yeah. You
Uh,
always know the history.
well, yeah. And as you might expect, 20 centuries worth of this and a whole series of global forms of Catholicism. So in the Roman Rite, we can look at a certain history. And that's the one I think most people watching this will really be part of. But we have at least 23 other rites, so other ways of celebrating this. But within our tradition, when we go back, we actually see this as one of the absolutely foundational tasks coming out of the Jewish history which underlies this material. And just as we have the celebration of Pesach Matzot, of both the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, they, as we know from the Gospels, have a very clear connection to the death of Jesus. So the earliest celebrations we have both connected with the Jewish experience and then celebrated specifically Jesus' death, resurrection, ascension into heaven, and sending of the Holy Spirit. Probably the most important part of that was actually the vigil. So moving from Saturday night or the beginning of Sunday, as our Jewish brothers and sisters would think of it, all the way through Easter Sunday itself. And the great celebration of what theologians call the Paschal Mystery, or the transformative experience of Jesus himself. Just like the Jews passed from slavery in Egypt to freedom, so too in Christ we pass from death to life. Um, Good enough?
Sure, sure. Yeah. Well, in the early church, when would the idea, and this kind of maybe putting you on the spot, when would the idea of this 3 day phenomenon have first appeared? Or
Yeah, that's, I would have to actually go to the
yeah,
resources to look at it
yeah,
because every place did it slightly differently.
But
Uh,
you can imagine the year after Jesus died and rose from the dead that people said, "Hey, it was just a year ago." And so probably the first thing that they remembered would have been the actual death and then the resurrection. And so uh, it certainly evolved over time, but that makes perfect sense that they would have done that a year later and 2 years later and et cetera. And the actual idea of 3 days and starting with the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, I think the evolution of that is more than we have time for today.
yeah, sure. But especially the Easter Vigil, that tradition was lost for many centuries.
yes.
Um,
Well, not only lost, but it completely dispositioned, I'll put it that way. So that rather than celebrating as we presently do with the kindling of fire, which demands that it be dark outside when we start the vigil, this was all done Saturday morning. And it was done usually and done all in Latin. So you really had only 3 to 10 parishioners there and some altar boys. And that celebration then took up most of the morning, but it certainly wasn't the experience we presently have. We restored the earlier sense of this as a genuine vigil.
and the restoration of it, a lot connected, or kind of coincided with the restoration of the arts of the initiation of adults as well. Just kind of at that point. You mentioned Pascal. My friend Chris Roosh, who you both
Yeah.
know, he wrote a bulletin column expressing his disappointment that unlike most other Latin-based languages, in English, the word for all of that is Easter. Mike, you're a linguist. How did that happen? Why
It's
do we have
easy to
such
say. It's very easy to say. Easter is Germanic language, as opposed to, you can even hear it in Hebrew, Pascha, right? Which Passover becomes our English translation of it. And then various forms of Romance languages still use Pasqua.
Yeah. You go
Right.
to Italy or France or
Right. Right.
Spain.
Pac,
Yeah.
Pac in French, P-A
Uh,
circumflex, I think. Anyway, sorry.
Well, let's talk about about the day, the liturgies that we move from one to the other as we make our way through Triduum. You know, on Holy Thursday, you mentioned, Vicky, it's not a reenactment, but we do this washing of feet, which is really kind of unusual. Other than the Eucharist, it's the only thing we do like that, isn't it?
mhm.
Mhm.
Yes. The thing is that this is the argument that you don't have to have 12 men because if you to reenact it, because if you were really reenacting it, you'd have to have 12 Jewish men. And I just don't know where you're going to find them. And fortunately, Pope
Well, there
Francis,
are Jewish men around.
well, I know,
They're just
no, I
not
don't
going to
think you
very
can.
likely be at our Mass of
Millions,
the
in
Lord
fact.
Supper.
You can find 12 Jewish men, yes. Whether or not they're going to want to come to your church and get their feet washed is going to be the question. And of course, the way that we did that, and the priest takes on the role of Christ, and well, I won't make any funny remarks about that whatsoever. But we have the wonderful example of Pope Francis, who has done men and women and all ages, and he's gone to women's prisons and all sorts of things for the foot washing. And we are trying to take the mandate, do this in memory of me, do what I have done. But what we're trying to help people understand is this role of the servant, because in the Jewish household, the head of the household was not the one that washed people's feet. If you didn't have servants, you might wind up washing your own feet, but it's usually a job of slaves, servants who are really slaves. And so the idea that Jesus, who was the host and of course the leader and the master, he takes the towel, he bends over the people's feet, and I've participated in enough foot washings. You do not have dirty feet at the Holy Thursday foot washing because you make sure your feet are cleaned before you take your shoes and socks off. But they would have had dirty feet from the unpaved roads, and I don't know how often they would bathe, and possibly sandals and everything else. So he was washing dirty feet of his disciples and said, "This is the kind of service I want you to give to others."
Well, that context you offer, Vicky, helps us understand why Peter protests so much,
Yes.
you know. And I can't wait to see The Chosen because the guy who plays Peter, he'll be great in protesting, kind of putting up a fit to
Exactly.
presume that Jesus would wash his feet.
Yeah.
But so you've been in the position, Mike, as a presider of washing people's feet. How can you talk about that experience?
Well, because I've been doing this now for multiple decades, I've also seen a change over time because we did start off fairly strongly with this representational idea. So parishes usually provided 12 men, and usually actually of a certain age. It's not as though we had children along with adults in the experience. And over the years, we've seen that group expand. Uh, so yes, I have had multiple
Yeah.
experiences.
No. You know, when I was at the cathedral I've been doing this for multiple decades now as well, Mike, actually, believe it or not. When I was at the cathedral in La Crosse, the associate's job was to find 12 people to have their feet washed. But interestingly, you know, the missal or the sacramentary, the instructions still said they should be men, but Bishop Burke washed the feet of women
Right.
at that time. But there was a gentleman, Christian Anderson. He was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he identified himself as such. Those were the letters behind his name. And Christian was a character. He was around the cathedral all the time, and it took a lot of persuading, but Bishop Burke, it took a lot of persuasion on the part of Christian to allow Bishop Burke to wash his feet, but he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy,
I
you know, that
think
was before we took pictures of everything. It'd be fascinating to have a picture of that.
Yeah.
but it's in my mind.
If I can jump in for just a second, watching, for example, parents washing the feet of their children, right? And this is kind of an extension of what the sacramentary actually calls for. But it certainly has a clear sense that this is grounded more in baptism than it is in the role of being an ordained person washing the feet of non-ordained people. Um, Powerful.
Sure. Well, and I guess early, I think this speaks to something you mentioned early when you started talking about this, Vicky, is it also ties this mandate of what I've done, so you must do, to our celebration of of the table, of what happens at the table, our Eucharistic celebration. And once a year, we're reminded very, very dramatically of that connection, huh?
Yes.
Now, I don't know if if I ever shared with you, I had a couple, they were students of mine at UW Stevens Point who, as they were planning their wedding,
Hmm.
they came in and said, this is, you'll appreciate that. They came in and said, now, Father Time, we know what you're going to say, but we want you to just listen to what we have to say first. And they wanted to wash each other's feet at their wedding. And Allie and Eli had been involved in our Triduum celebrations all their time at UW Stevens Point. And so I said, well, of course, I was going to say no, but but I listened and you convinced me that. But I asked Richard, is it Hillgartner, the guy from
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Baltimore, at a National Pastor Musicians Convention. He was doing something on Triduum and talking about this, and I asked him about that. And of course, he said, no, 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 there's completely, or no, it's about the breakout was about weddings. And he said, oh, no, 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 you should never do that, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of explained a little more. And then he came up to me afterwards and he said, I was thinking, because you offered some explanation and stuff that he hadn't listened to. And he said, I think in that moment I would have allowed it, I would have done it. So it was the circumstance, the people. Okay, so Holy Thursday. Um, we're not going to go through all the details of Holy Thursday. We're going to go on to Good Friday because we could
Oh,
be.
hold on, though,
Oh
because
yeah,
there's one
yeah,
tiny
yeah,
detail that I do want to share in
sure.
this, which is unique to Holy Thursday. And that is once we've completed the washing of the feet, and as you pointed out, it's this direct connection to Jesus' command of how we are to care for each other. It's very interesting, but the official documentation says following this, we go to the regular preparation and presentation of the gifts of bread and wine, and the collection that's part of that. And what's fascinating is every other time that's mentioned, it's gifts for the poor and for the maintenance of the church, for the church's needs and the needs of the poor. But only on Holy Thursday there's no mention of the needs of the church at all. This is a collection specifically for the poor. So the deep connection to caring for each other in a ritual way in the service
Mm.
and caring for each other in the concrete ways of daily life.
And kind of bringing a liturgical conclusion to our Lenten almsgiving. For example, in our parishes, we collect our rice bowls at Holy
Yes.
Thursday and in the days and weeks that follow. But which, and as we know, is even more this year that we support Catholic Relief Services than
Absolutely.
any other time. So, is there any part of Holy Thursday though that's like really important for you that you appreciate or that you'd want to be sure we address?
Well, it probably is good, especially if you've got people who've never been there before, to know that Mass does not end in a normal kind of fashion. That the Eucharist, rather than going into the tabernacle, goes to another place which has been prepared for reposition, and then people can stay and pray for whatever time that the parish has allowed for that. And I think I do know some people who find that a very moving experience that they do that on a yearly basis. And it's not quite the same as the kind of adoration that we do with the monstrance or anything like that, because we don't use that. Um, and so it's a different kind of adoration. And that Eucharist, of course, is what gets used on Good Friday, or if there were any people who are dying or things like that.
I've always thought of the conclusion of Holy Thursday as kind of a drifting. We drift away. There's no procession. There's not people hanging around visiting and things like that. We just kind of drift off into the night. Maybe spend our time in prayer, however, but then off drift.
Awaiting the next one.
Well, and kind of drifting off as the disciples or others did too. So, we come to Good Friday, another day of interesting elements. The veneration of cross and these intercessions that go on forever. Mike, what is that all about?
Well, let me once again be the historian slightly here. The format is one that most of us are not even familiar with. We're used to a series of relatively short petitions or intercessions, and then we all together make a response. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer, or Lord, have mercy, something like that. And these are actually the ancient Roman forms, where there's a fairly lengthy call to a particular topic, and then, incredibly importantly, silent prayer. You call people to this prayer and then silent prayer for a significant amount of time. And then the priest, in the name of the assembly, makes the formal prayer. So that pattern, which is very different than the other times that we do this kind of intercessory prayer at liturgy, is really unique to Good Friday. Now, why do we have so many? Well, frankly, because there's so much to pray about. Honest, that's absolutely honest. So, when you're being asked to pray for the entire world and for all those who are experiencing the salvific power of Jesus' death and resurrection, that's not surprising. We pray for Pope, for bishops, for priests, for deacons, for women religious, for the community as a whole. I love this one. For those who do not believe in Christ, so all those who are not Christians, for all those who do not believe in God, and we're praying for them. So it's anything but an enclosed kind of praying just for us. We are the holy saved ones. No, it's us, like Christ, praying for the salvation of the whole world.
One of the premises that are behind the book that I wrote is that all of our liturgies have a great number of words, and it's very easy for them to just pass us by. And so I recommend that in private prayer, approaching the Triduum, that we take some of these prayers, and those intercessions are one of the big ones, and pray them at home alone, thinking about what they each mean. Who is it that we're praying for? Who are these people who don't believe in God? You might have relatives that don't believe in God. You can think then about them in ways that you could never do while we're doing them at the service, because it would go too fast. So, and other things, the prayer over the water that we're going to do tomorrow, other kinds of texts like that, to take them outside. And then it's not like there's a deadline. So you could spend, I know I should know this by heart. I think there might be 10 intercessions, but whatever they are, you could do those one a week for 10 weeks. Now you can't get that in before this year's Easter Vigil, but it still could be something that took a long time and became part of your personal prayer.
Sure.
For
Well,
my Polish relatives versus my German relatives.
one of the questions I was going to ask is what advice you would have for people to help prepare for Triduum, and I'm going to include in the email that this video comes in an email to the parishioners. I'm going to include those texts for those prayers.
Oh,
and
good.
blessing
Yeah.
of water. So people they're also give us this day and things like that. But if people don't have those resources, they could.
And you'd be surprised what you can find online.
Right.
Also,
right.
a lot of the prayers can be found if people know how to,
But I'll find them for them and put them in the email so they won't have to go hunting.
Excellent. You are a good pastor.
Yeah, well, be that as it may or whatever. Just a quick thought about the veneration of the cross. Again, that's kind of an unusual thing that we do.
Vicky?
Well, I again would say that it's something that is very good to meditate on beforehand in some ways. Why are we venerating this instrument of torture and death? But we have been told in other parts of the gospel to take up our cross and follow him. So we are definitely in a Thanksgiving kind of mode for what Jesus did on the cross. But that concept of us and our crosses, which everybody has, I don't even, multiple crosses that they've endured, and they know others who have crosses. And so we are venerating what Jesus did, but what that means for us and our own taking on of the cross and following him in our discipleship. And so there's so many levels of meaning of what's going on with the cross. I mean, meditating on the cross is an interesting thing anyway, because where else we have jewelry. We wear crosses as jewelry. We have crosses on the walls of our homes. The cross is a huge symbol. We make the sign of the cross. This is a huge symbol in our lives. And all of that is coming together on Good Friday in this ritual action that we have. And it kind of forces us to reflect on something that is part of our daily lives usually, but maybe we haven't really thought about it since grandma taught us how to do that. So I think all of it comes together.
And I jump in just to say the ritual really looks at two things in what they call the adoration of the cross. And isn't that fascinating? Not the veneration of the cross. That's what we would expect. But it's the term we actually use for the triune God, and that the experience of the cross, because of Jesus' saving blood associated with it, is actually seen as an act of adoration. And the two ways you do it ritually is by showing the cross, usually with a kind of veil over it, and then parts of the cross are revealed, taking away the veil so that we can adore the instrument of our salvation. And then the procession. And it's the fact that we can come to the cross and that we can make our own gestures of adoration, which to me is frequently heartbreaking, to see people that can barely walk coming forward, with their canes, or those who will touch the cross or simply bow before it. That all of that processional activity, while we're singing some of the most beautiful poetry we have, is part of the way we adore the cross.
And that's our acclamation as we reveal the cross as come, let us adore. Right?
Yes.
Well, we probably should wrap up, and we haven't even gotten to the Easter Vigil. But which one of the things I wanted to talk about is that the things that people often say, well, these things are so long. Well, first of all, Thursday and Friday are really not much longer than a normal mass. Also that, well, so they start a little later or whatever. They're not, well, the Saturday or Friday would be in the afternoon, but they're not for children or families. Well, I would say for myself, and I suspect you might agree, that a lot of my Catholic imagination was formed at these liturgies when I was a child.
Yeah.
And if we're not doing that, if we're not participating in these things as a family with our children, we miss that whole component.
Right.
And that brings me to the Easter Vigil. What would children find engaging at an Easter Vigil celebration?
Well, you've got to talk about the music.
Or the fire, or the fire.
There's a fire, there's
And
water,
the water.
and people get wet. And there's a glorious story of somebody being, there's a number of different ways to do the baptism. And I know this story of at this parish, the person knelt in the font and the priest took a pitcher of water, but did it 3 times for Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Right.
Okay. So they pour the first one, and you can see that this little kid is just in awe, and the eyes are big, and oh my God, they just got
A child who's there
who's
watching.
just watching
Participant,
this
yeah.
and says, they got that lady all wet. I can't believe it. And then, the second one goes on, and then the child in a huge voice, they're gonna do it again because they did it the third time over the lady. And he was just and this little, I mean, this was like a 4-year-old, or I'm not good at ages, but a 4 or 5-year-old was just awestruck at all of this water. And I'm sure, I hope somebody told him what it all meant when it was all
Right.
over, because he knew it meant something, and it
Yeah,
meant something special.
yeah.
So yeah, fire and water.
And great stories, which in some parishes are told in sometimes dynamic ways.
Right.
It- and the idea that it's too long. Well, how long should it be, right?
Well, let me once again go to official
Yeah,
documentation.
give us, Mike, how long what the vigil could all entail.
Well,
Oh,
right. And again, I'm not recommending this for any particular parish
And
outside
let's
of
be clear, our
monastery.
parishes do not do all of this.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, monasteries, that's a different question because they're dedicated specifically to the performance of the liturgy. But let's go back for a second. There is a difference between what we call the liturgy of the word and the vigil. And the vigil is an extended period of time in the night. That's part of the reason why we have the kindling of the fire and the lighting of the Easter candle before we ever get to the vigil service. So multiple readings that happen during the night. And the only key in the official documentation is you started after sunset, and then the Eucharist part of this is to be done around dawn. So the idea is the idealist version of this, that you basically are doing a reading and a psalm and a prayer and a long time of silence for every single one of the readings in the vigil. Now, I did try this early on in my priesthood.
In a parish,
And
Mike?
in a parish, and the parish was very, very kind about even being willing to try it. Unfortunately, I was almost exhausted from all of the other events of
Yeah.
Triduum, so I just wanted to take a little nap, just a little nap at one point, and suddenly there were a telephone going off telling me, "It's time for Mass. Where are you?" Right? So there can be, how shall we put this gently, the weakness of the flesh sometimes when we're celebrating a lengthy vigil service.
Or youthful naivete or
Or
something.
youthful naivete.
Youthful
Exactly.
exuberance without quite enough exuberance. Um, why do we do all these readings? I mean, and again, we don't do all of them, but what's the significance of the readings?
Vicky, you
salvation
remember?
history. Salvation history. We're going through some of the key points, starting with Genesis, starting with the creation of the world. Each reading has its reason. I mean, God created the world. The world was good, not evil. God created human beings. God put human beings in charge of the world. We are stewards of the earth. All of those reasons, and that's where we start. And then we go to Abraham and Isaac, we go to Moses and the Exodus, we go through some of the key times of the covenant that God has made with us. And in fact, I was just looking at them for another reason, but there are 7 of them. And I
And
used to
there's the
tell,
epistle and the epistle.
well, then after the 7
Yeah.
vigiling readings,
That's
we
right.
actually go back again to the older form, and we don't have, 2 readings in a gospel. We have the one reading, the epistle from Romans, and then a lengthy psalm.
That's a good setup. I've never really understood the vigil, and then we come to the Gloria
The
and
Gloria. Yeah, now we're
epistle.
really starting mass with
Yeah.
the Gloria, the
Well,
epistle,
Father
the
Tom learned something today.
the psalm, which is also the gospel acclamation, because the refrain of that psalm is Alleluia, and
Right.
then the gospel. So yes,
Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Um, okay, so music, Vicky, you mentioned music.
Ah,
So Mike Jonkis, in addition to being a priest and pastor, theologian, is the composer of many songs that people, hymns that people in our parish would be familiar with, and some of which are sung during our Easter or our Triduum celebrations. For sure, Take and Eat is sung at all three of our parishes at different times. No Greater Love, St. Anne's always sings No Greater Love during communion on Good Friday.
Yeah.
And We Come to Your Feast is a favorite as well at the vigil at St. Anne's. But Eastside Parishes does a lot of Mike's music at different times as well. So, Vicky, what Mike Jonkis music should be sung as part of a Triduum celebration?
well, I agree with all of your suggestions so far, but he has written a great number of psalms, and we need a lot of psalms on Saturday night. But also, I have heard the song that gets to me the most, that speaks to my heart, is who would believe what we have heard? Who would believe what we have heard?
Yeah,
A Man of Sorrows, that taken from the first reading of Good Friday. And I've heard that one parish in particular that I have often been at, they do that on Good Friday, and it's just I can't even express the the music is so fits the words so well, I think.
well, who would believe, right?
Yes, yes. So that's the first one that comes to my mind.
What about you, Mike?
Besides, yes, there we go.
Not
It's
necessarily if
the
you're
day
not
the Lord.
necessarily
Go ahead.
well, not
No.
necessarily your song, a song you composed, but
Oh, I thought you were asking specifically for.
well, it could be. It could be. Which
Uh,
one would it be?
I really, really like my setting of Psalm 118. So, this is the day the
Oh,
Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. That psalm setting to me kind of speaks the season.
yeah.
So,
Okay, great, great. So where will you both be celebrating Triduum this year?
Vicky,
Well, I go to my parish.
Hey,
I worked for a long time, well, 5 years at St. Olaf in downtown Minneapolis, and I haven't always been there for the vigil because I have friends in many other places, and wind up going with friends of mine. Uh, but that's kind of
okay.
St. Olaf, I think, does a very good job, musically, and I feel
And now you get to
nurtured
be there. You get to
and
be there
fed.
as a member of the assembly, right?
Yes, I don't have to work.
Yeah.
Ah, I'm a member of the assembly, which is my
Which
first
is work. Which
ministry.
is work. You know that you wrote a book
Yes, the
about
work
that.
of the liturgy. The first ministry is the ministry of the assembly. Yes, I am there to fully participate, and I'll shut up now. Yes, Mike?
No, no, no.
well, it's just to say that's one of the difficulties of being a retired priest, because I no longer have the responsibility to preside over the entire Triduum, which would be, I think, the ideal. But I will be celebrating Holy Thursday at St. Francis Cabrini. I am not scheduled for anything on Good Friday.
Huh.
And the Easter Vigil will actually, for me, be celebrated at Carondelet Village, which is basically a retirement home that the Sisters of St. Joseph are especially associated with. So it's
Wow.
very different when the rituals of the 3 days are split up into very different places.
Right, right.
And last little note for me, and the great pain for me is, of course, there's not going to be the initiation of new baptized Christians as part of the service. So,
Okay, well, look forward to hearing all about it when we get together after Easter. Our parishes will be celebrating. The schedules will be in the email. Everyone got a card in the mail, a personal invitation inviting everyone to be part of these liturgies for Triduum. And now I hope we come to it with a better understanding of why it's important, why it's hopefully might be engaging, intriguing for us to draw us into these great 3 days. Mike and Vicky, thank you very much. And
You're
I
welcome.
have a
Thank
blessed
you.
Triduum and look forward to seeing you after Easter.
You too. Thank you very much.